Hello and welcome back to the AWS Summit Online. I'm Martin Beebe, and today we're going to be doing some coding. We're going to code a container-based application, and we're going to host it on Fargate using the AWS Fargate service, and we're going to build all of the infrastructure as code using C#. So everything from the infrastructure through to the actual code in the application, it's all going to be in C# and .NET. So we're going to get started by heading over to our computer and going into our terminal. So in the command prompt, I'm going to just make a directory. Make directory. We're going to call this Fargate demo. It's going to go and cd into that folder. And in this folder, I'm just going to go and create a little file called to-do.markdown. And this is going to be the place that I'm going to store everything that we're going to be working on. So I'm going to open to-do.markdown, and on my machine, that's going to open up in Rider. Rider is my preferred application for developing C#, but you could be using Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code for this. There's nothing specific about the editor really that I'm doing here. And I'm going to maximize that. And then I'm going to put some to-dos or paste in some to-dos, things that I hope to do in this session. So we're going to firstly create a sample CDK application. Then we're going to add some Nuget packages, add a VPC, a virtual private cloud, add a cluster, add a load balanced Fargate service. We're going to create a sample .NET application. We're just going to use the sort of basic create sample, which comes shipped with the .NET command line tooling. We're going to then add a Dockerfile to that newly created application. That Dockerfile is going to explain how we go and create a container from that sample application. And then we're going to deploy that with a task definition to our Fargate cluster. Finally, we're going to add a certificate to this. So we're going to add a HTTPS certificate so that we've got a secure connection to our site. And then once we've done that, I'm just going to delete everything and just show you how quickly we can tear it down using the Cloud Development Kit. So I'm going to need another folder. So inside that Fargate demo, I'm going to make a directory and I'm going to call it .NET because we'll be using .NET for this particular example. Could use other languages. So at the command line, I'm going to type CDK init sample app language C#. It's going to create me a sample application in C#. I'm going to clear that. And then I'll have a skeleton project. And in the source folder, I have a .NET solution. Now, at the moment, I'm in Rider, but I'm not inside that solution. So I'm just going to open up that solution in Rider. If I just go into that folder and then open .NET SLN, it should open up in another window in Rider. And that just means that it's going to know it's a C# application and things like Nuget and IntelliSense and things like that are going to work. Okay, so my application is loading. My project is loaded. So now I should be able to browse this project. And if I go into the .NET stack, this has got a sample stack for me. I'm not going to use this sample today. This is just like the 101 demo. I'm going to delete that code, and I'm going to delete these Nuget package references. I'm going to paste my own. I want to use this ECS, Elastic Container Service package. So I'm just going to go and search Nuget and install that Nuget package. This is how you install Nuget packages in Rider. You'd do it obviously slightly differently if you were going to be doing this inside of Visual Studio, but it's roughly the same. We're going to install that, and now we have that package installed. I'm also going to install the one underneath it, which is the EC Patterns library. And this has some CDK constructs, which allow us to create some infrastructure. Now, next I'm going to, where are we? Create our simple CDK application. We've added some Nuget packages. So the next thing is I'm going to add a VPC, add a cluster, and add a load balanced Fargate service. Okay, so let's add a VPC. So we're going to use a thing called a construct in the CDK. It's like an object really. That's going to create a new VPC object. And we're going to say max availability zones are 3. So it's going to create this VPC across 3 availability zones. I'm also going to create a cluster which connects to that VPC. So this cluster is going to exist, this ECS cluster is going to exist inside of that virtual private cloud. And then I'm going to paste in some code here, which is basically the service properties of my Fargate cluster. So I'm going to connect it up to that cluster up there. I'm going to say I want 6, or maybe I could change this and say I want 5 containers or 5 tasks. And then I want to connect, or basically use this Docker image, so the Amazon ECS sample Docker image. That's going to come from Docker Hub. I'm going to say this amount of memory, and I'm going to say I want a load balancer. And then I'm finally going to say new application load balanced Fargate service. This is coming from that patterns Nuget library. And what this is going to do effectively is create me a VPC. It's going to create me a cluster, and then it's going to create a Fargate service with a load balancer, and it's going to create 5 versions of that container that I wanted. It's just a sample container, Amazon-ECS-sample. So if I say CDK synth, that's going to generate the CloudFormation template, or basically the description of all the infrastructure I'm just going to create there. It's going to create it in a file for me. It's just going to actually print it out here into the terminal or the command line. You can see that is a lot of infrastructure I just created in a few lines of code. That's stuff like the subnets and all of the networking to set up a virtual private cloud, and then my ECS cluster, and then the load balancer, and then connecting it all together. I wrote that in a few lines of code, but if I wanted to write it in CloudFormation, I'd have had to write all of that stuff. So now I can just go and deploy that. So Cdk Deploy, and that will deploy that infrastructure to my account. Now it's going to ask me if I want to make some changes. I'm going to have to do some certain things with security groups and stuff. So it's just prompting me to check that. I'm not going to check it. I'm just going to say yes. And then it's going to start creating my infrastructure in my AWS account. So I have added a VPC. I have added a cluster, and I've even added a Fargate service. But at the moment, I'm just using this sample container. I've not actually created my .NET application yet, or containerized that .NET application at all. So at the moment, it's kind of very straightforward. I'm using a sample application. I'm saying I want 5 container instances of that sample container. I want to put it into Fargate, and I use that Cdk Deploy to go and do that and create all that infrastructure for me. So now it's going to go and work its magic and start using CloudFormation, because I'm actually using a thing called the Cloud Development Kit to write my infrastructure. Now I'm doing it in C#. You could do this in TypeScript, in Python, in Java. I'm using C# to create this infrastructure. But what actually happens is when I deploy, it uses that synth command to generate that CloudFormation file. And then the CloudFormation file is what it sends to AWS. So it's just like this. It's a tool which allows me to create CloudFormation, really, the Cloud Development Kit. And so I've went and built that. I've now got it, hopefully, in the background there running and creating my infrastructure for me. If I wanted to go and look at that stuff, I'd go into the console and look at CloudFormation, and I'd be able to see my actual infrastructure being created inside of CloudFormation, and my Fargate service kicking off and all that sort of stuff as well. So let's go and see a little bit about this Docker image that we used. So on this is Docker Hub, and we'll see it's a sample PHP application. It's nothing special, the application we're deploying. It's we could be using our own container from Docker Hub, or we could be using the Amazon Elastic Container Registry. If you're not familiar with this, it's a bit like a private Docker Hub for you. And if I go into the console and look at the Elastic Container Registry, you'll see that I have a number of container repositories in there already. And the one at the top is, full fact, that's actually a Windows container. Windows container, and yeah, this one here, this is my CDK assets. And this is anything which I build using CDK and deploy, and you'll see me doing this in a minute, that shows up here. But I could actually just post my own command, my own containers. And so this shows you how you would connect to ECR and how you could push your Docker containers from your local machine up to ECR. And we're not going to be doing it this way. We're going to actually use some features inside of the CDK to do some of this clever stuff. Also, if you're on a Windows machine, there's the commands there in PowerShell to take Docker images which have built locally and push them up to the Elastic Container Registry, or ECR. So let's go and check if, where are we? We'll go and check if our application's been built. It has. So now I've got a URL. This is the output from my load balanced Fargate service. And you can see if I go to it, I've got a simple PHP application. Congratulations, it's running. And there should be 5 containers backing that, and it's load balanced between those 5 containers. What I need to do now is create a sample .NET application. So I want to create just a basic hello world .NET application. So how best to do this? I'll go into this little terminal, and I will type .NET new web app -o website. So it's going to create me a web app using that sample template, and it's going to be put in a folder called website, and it will create a website cproj. So now I have that created. So if I just go into the website folder, I have my cproj, my stuff in there. I want to create a Dockerfile in there to try and create or containerize this particular application. So I'm just going to create a Dockerfile. And then I'm going to open that Dockerfile. The Dockerfile is going to open up inside of Rider. And I'm just going to paste in a Dockerfile that I've created earlier. If you're not familiar with Docker, it's quite straightforward. It uses the base build, moves to a working directory, it copies the files, it then runs .NET restore to get the NuGet packages, then .NET publish to a folder, and then it's got a multi-stage build. So then next, it takes another base image, it goes to the app folder, copies the built files, and then it basically has an entry point for my website DLL, which is what effectively I'll be running. So now I want to kind of replace this the container I was using with this .NET container. And CDK does a cool thing. It can do a build for Docker directly in there. You need Docker installed to be able to do this, but what I'm going to do is create a task definition for Fargate. So that's a construct for a task definition. And I'm going to say, here's my container options. I'm going to use a container image from asset. Now I could say from registrar or from, so I could get it from the Elastic Container Registry, but I'm going to say from an image, which is basically build it from a local folder on my machine. And that folder is called website. And then I'm going to say, this is a port mapping. So my container port runs on port 80. The host port should run on port 80. And then paste in, I'm going to add that container to my definition, my task definition. And I'm going to add the port mapping to that task definition. So now I have that task definition. I can replace this task image options, which point to something else. And I'll just basically set the task definition for this service properties to point to that newly created task definition, which ultimately points to this website that I created. And now if I do a CDK deploy, instead of just going to fetch the image from, oh, I'm in the wrong folder. So I'll come out into the folder above it and run the same command, Cdk Deploy. Yes, .NET, is that right? Yeah, Cdk Deploy. And then that will actually do it's going to do exactly the same sort of thing. It's going to ask me if I want to make the changes that I'm going to be making. I'm going to say yes to those changes. And then the next stage, it's actually going to go and build the Docker image for me. And it's going to go and push the Docker image to that ECR, the Elastic Container Registry. And once it's pushed it there, that's what it's going to then use to deploy my application. So you see it's published successfully there. And that's the link to the CDK assets inside my ECR. And then it goes to CloudFormation with this newly built container, and it says, well, go and provision this, go and build this in my infrastructure using this container. And I've created the Dockerfile, I've replaced the Docker image with task definition, and that takes a little bit of time. It's going to go and do it's got to do a bit of work actually. It's got to go and bring down the other service that I've already got running, bring down those containers, those 5 containers, and then replace them with new containers. And once that's all up and running, I will have replaced the PHP application with that sample .NET application that I'm running. Now I'm using .NET 3.1 to create that .NET application, but this will work with any .NET Core application, framework can be done. So if you've got like .NET 2.1, then you'd use the exact same method for this. Your Dockerfile would look different, but it would be exactly the same sort of process. It's a little bit more complicated if you're using the full framework, as in the full .NET framework, full fat, as I like to call it. You might then, at that point, have to start looking into using Windows containers on ECR. And you wouldn't be able to use the Fargate service, but you could use the Elastic Container Registry service, the ECS or Elastic Container Service that does have Windows container support. So there are ways to run Windows containers. So if you don't have Linux containers and you're not running .NET Core, there are still ways that you can create containerized workloads. But it's a little bit slightly different to the way I'm doing it here. Now, once that's sort of created, it's going in creating. Actually, if I go over to the console and just quickly show you in CloudFormation that that's actually doing something. So if I go over to demo .NET Stack, you can see it shows up in CloudFormation just as if I was using regular CloudFormation, but I'm using the CDK to do all of this. And it's just saying, well, it's done this, it's done that. It's created these resources, it's created those resources. You can see the CDK template that it's pushed, any change sets that I might have. And so it's just CloudFormation. The other thing I want to do is add onto this a certificate. So I already have a certificate in Certificate Manager. I basically pressed that request a certificate button earlier on and created a fargate.thebeebs.net certificate. You can create free HTTPS TLS certificates for your services. As long as your services are running inside of AWS, you can run it. So there's the ARN for that particular certificate, and I'm going to need that ARN in a moment. Oh, there you go. So now I've refreshed that page, and you can see that my .NET, my sample .NET application is now running. So it's actually replaced that PHP website. So if I go to the Elastic Container Service, you'll see that I have my .NET stack. I've got a cluster. And if I go into the tasks, you'll see I have five tasks. And if I go into one of those task definitions, you'll see that it's pointing, the container image is pointing over to my Docker image. There we go. So it's kind of updated it all. It seems to be kind of in a good state. My application is now running. It's being load balanced across 5 containers, which are running in ECS. If I go into that load balancer, there should be a load balancer, which I create. Well, I didn't create it. CDK created it for me. There's the load balancer, and that's got a URL. And that's the same URL which was output by the terminal. So I can click on that, and you can see I've gone to the website. It's great, but I don't really want to use that ugly URL. I want to use my own fargate.thebeebs.net domain, and I want to add a HTTPS certificate to it, a TLS. So I've got the certificate I already created. A few quick clicks. It takes about 15 minutes or so. In this instance, it took about 15 minutes to create the certificate and verify. Had to do some domain name verification, where basically when you create the certificate, you have to go then back to your domain name and you paste in 2 values just to show that you own the domain. And then it does some validation to make sure that you own the domain. Then it issues a certificate for you. The certificates are free. You can use them then against any AWS services which require sort of HTTPS certificates. So I'm going to attach that, or I want to attach that certificate to my load balancer. So I'm going to add a certificate. Okay. Right, so I need to go into to my .NET application, and I need to add a certificate here. So I'm just going to paste in some code. And add in a certificate, and I'm just sort of add that. There we go. And it says I'm going to add my certificate, and I just point it to an ARN. Now we could actually use the CDK to create a certificate for me, but it's easier and quicker for this demo if I just use an existing ARN that I've already created. So what I do is to show you that basically, if I wanted to create a sort of a new certificate. All I would do is, will this compile or not? I just write it in here. The new certificate, and then it asks for the scope. This is a sort of the formula for almost everything you write in the CDK. You write the scope, which is this, then you give it a name like an ID, and then you provide some properties to that construct. So in this instance, I'm going to supply some certificate properties. And new up an object, and I would just apply stuff like the domain name, and inside the domain name I would add the Fargate or the Beebs or whatever, and it would go off and actually generate a certificate for me. I don't need to do that because I've already created a certificate, but I do need to add, if you're, oh gosh, I've got these, I've got a problem now with the balancing of my, is that right? That looks right. Okay, tab in there. So now I'm going to add a domain name and a domain zone for this. Now this is going to basically update your Route 53 stuff for you. So I'm going to say the domain name is fargate.thebeebs.net, and the domain zone or the hosted zone in my account is the beebs.net. So it's going to look for a hosted zone inside of Route 53 called the beebs.net, and it's going to add fargate.thebeebs, and it's going to connect it to my load balancer. So it's going to do all the domain stuff for me that I need to do as well. So now I can just go and Cdk deploy that change. And with any luck, okay, it's gonna say that, okay, I'm gonna stop using port 80 and I'm gonna switch over to port 443 on the security group. You could also support port 80 if you wanted to, or maybe put a rule in there to point 80 to 443, but I didn't do that. I'm just basically only supporting 443. That's probably not what I want to do in production. But that will make the change. It will change the security group. It will change the load balancer, add the certificate to the load balancer for me, and basically do all of the setup of the HTTPS certificate so that it will then work and look like the certificate's been added to my site. So I've added the certificate, and at the bottom now, instead of the load balancer, we now have a URL. It says fargate.thebeebs.net. And if I go into, where is it? Route 53. You'll see in the account, I actually have a hosted zone, the beebs.net. And if I were using this account to actually host the domain, which I am not, this would all work because I've then got fargate.thebeebs.net pointing to my load balancer, and it would all work. Actually, I'm not using this account to manage my domains. I actually have it in my personal account, so it's maybe a little bit more tricky. I'll just show you what I'm doing just to sort of not hide anything from you. But you hopefully wouldn't need to do this because your account where you're launching would be the same account that you're managing the domain. But I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to copy that URL, and I'm going to go into a different profile in Chrome. So I'm just going to log into a different AWS account. So I'm going to log into my personal AWS account, which is where I keep all of my domain names. The other account I'm using is my work account. And I'm going to say Route 53. I've got a hosted zone in here. This is where my actual domain is pointed to. And so if I go into the .NET, I have this Fargate entry. and I'm going to just point it to a new, well, to that load balancer effectively. And even though it's in a different account, it still recognizes what the zone ID of it is. And then I switch back to my other account. And now that Fargate URL will work. Okay, so the Fargate URL will work, but it will actually only work on HTTPS because I'm not listing on port 80. But you can see now I've got my certificate there from Amazon for fargate.thebeebs.net, and I've got the little lock there, so the website is now secure, which is cool. And now I'm going to be able to sort of delete everything in there. So to delete everything, all you do is you issue the command to say Cdk Destroy. And what Cdk Destroy does is it basically undoes your CloudFormation. It goes to the CloudFormation system and it just deletes the whole stack. It makes sure that you want to do it. I do want to do it. And it starts destroying that for me there, which is cool. So you'll see that things start getting deleted. And so that's my infrastructure as code. I could go and delete that in any, I could go and run that in any environment, and it'll build up that infrastructure ever again. It makes it really easy to manage. This is Rider, by the way, which I'm using, just so a lot of people ask what editor I'm using. It's a little bit uncommon. It has this capability to do AWS Explorer, so I can see the .NET stack for CloudFormation is actually being deleted. I can even sort of inspect it from within Rider and see, yep, it's some parts of it are getting deleted, some of it's updated, and all the different events that have happened, and then all of the different resources and so forth. So it's quite cool that you can see that integration from directly inside Rider. If you're interested, let's just quickly go into CloudFormation. And you can see there as well, the delete in progress. So I can see it in many different places. I can see it in my IDE, I can see it in CloudFormation, and obviously I can see it in the console as I'm actually executing and running that as well. What else do I want to show you? So we've created a sample CDK application. We've added some Nuget packages. We've added a VPC, a cluster, a load balanced Fargate service. We've created a sample .NET application, created a Dockerfile in there, replaced the Docker image with a task definition, added a certificate, and then we've finally went and deleted everything. So we've done those 10 steps in just under 30 minutes. And I've been Martin Beebe, and that's my Twitter handle. No, sorry, that's my website, and that's my Twitter handle. And if you want to contact me, then please feel free to reach out and say hello. I've been Martin Beebe. That's everything from me. Thank you very much.